Ramo gave me very clear instructions, keep it brief. And so I'm not sure that Dr. Ramo needs any introduction, but he is one of the founders of the New Mexico Heart Institute. He's been on KOAT for a zillion years and writing for the newspaper, and has been a wonderful member of our community for all of us for whom heart health is important. I would be remiss as well as if I didn't acknowledge the fact that his wife, Roberta Cooper Ramo, is here tonight. And Roberta was the first woman president of the American Bar Association. It was about time. And then, and from our perspective, both of the Ramo, we were fortunate enough to be able to work with both of the Ramos' children's, Joshua and Jennifer, who graduated in the late 80s. I knew them both, great kids. And with no further ado, Barry Ramo.
Well, it is truly a pleasure to be able to moderate a panel with such distinguished people. I said this before, that if I were going to go into medicine again, I would do it in neuroscience, because I think it's so exciting. And while I am here, I want to introduce Dr. Savage and Dr. Dr. Shuttleworth, excuse me, who are the neuroscientists among the large department of neuroscience that they have at the university. And they are responsible for bringing one of our speakers here today, whom I think will amaze you with both his clarity and his intellect. First, I will tell you that they handed out cards, and if you have any questions, jot them down during the period, and then we'll pick them up and answer them during the question and answer period. When I was a student in London in the 1960s, I studied with Dr. Paul Wood, and Paul Wood had written the textbook on cardiology, and he wrote it from meticulous records that he had kept on all of his patients that not only described their disease, but he also described what happened to them. And one of the more remarkable patients that I saw there was a patient with heart failure. And Dr. Wood's conclusion was that this patient's heart was weak and that what we needed to do was strengthen his heart. Well, over the next 20 or 30 years, cardiology after World War II took off, and particularly in the 60s and 70s, when we developed an understanding of why these diseases were happening, what we call pathophysiology. What it was going on in the cellular level, at the physiologic level, that was causing these problems. One of the things we learned was that the problem wasn't going to get better if what you did was whip the heart. You had to change the way the body reacted to the failing heart. We would have not known that had we simply used Dr. Wood's empiric observations. Well, we are at that point in neuroscience. We are at a point where the basic physiology now is translating into the clinical arena. It's going from what we call the bench to the bedside. So our first speaker tonight, who is absolutely an extraordinary man, and who will tell us about his experience looking at the basic physiology. And Dr. Brickman is a neuroscientist who went to the National Institutes of Health after he completed his fellowship in cognitive neuroscience. That was a fellowship that none of us knew about when we were, even maybe 8 or 10 years ago. We were able to attract him after 5 years at the National Institutes of Health, where he did some very fundamental research on cognitive understanding. And he's going to talk to you about the basic science from which Dr. Dan Duhigg, who is a professor at the University of New Mexico and the head of the addiction service at Presbyterian Hospital, longtime faculty member in the Health Science Center, is going to help us understand how what Dr. Brickman says about basic science, how he's going to translate it into how he's taking care of patients. And then we have another very exciting clinical person, Dr. Ann Waldorf. Dr. Ann Waldorf is a psychologist in the Department of Psychiatry Her specialty is addiction medicine. She is the vice chief of the Department of Psychiatry, and she's then going to talk about how the information that Dr. Brigman has told us and Dr. Duhigg has told us is applied in the clinical setting. So with no more ado, I'm very pleased to introduce John. Why don't you come up here and let them know about what we need to know. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Amo. I really appreciate that introduction. I'm not sure if I can live up to it, but I'll do my best. And also thank you to the Albuquerque Academy for hosting this event for Brain Awareness Week. And as you can all see, and you know because you're here for this lecture, what we're talking about tonight is your dazzling brain and how you keep it balanced. What do we mean when we think about keeping your brain balanced? Well, in very simple terms, what we're talking about is how you can develop patterns of behavior that lead you to good outcomes. Good outcomes meaning things that make you feel good, that sense of well-being that you have in your life, both in the short term, something that makes me feel really good right now, but also in the long term. If I keep doing this, it's going to lead me to things that I like, and it's going to make me feel good about my life. So the other half of that coin is sometimes those patterns don't work for us long term. We establish patterns of behavior, and I keep using that phrase, but another phrase you're probably more familiar with is habits. We develop habits that may work for a while, and then they start not working for us. So how do we realize that these habits are not working for us and change our behavior? So I know that everybody in this room, or at least I, have bad habits that I wish that I could change. Sometimes we say, I need to break that habit. What we're going to talk to you about is maybe breaking the habit isn't the right word for it. So what's a bad habit that I have in my life? Well, maybe this is something that you can relate to. My bad habit really relates to something very fundamental in all of our lives, the couch. Right? So I work full-time. My wife works full-time. We have 2 small kids who are both in school, and so they work full-time. We have busy days, and we come home at the end of the day, and we're all pretty tired from everything that we're doing. Learning to read is actually a lot harder than what I'm doing during the day, so they're more tired than I am. And we eat dinner together, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to play, and then it's time for a bath and a book, and then to bed. Okay, so the kids are in bed, the day is winding down, relax on the couch, and feel good, right? Well, yeah, so this couch is actually a lot nicer than my couch, but it kind of looks like it. And you sit down on the couch and you think, perfect, a good end to the day, right? Well, not for me. When I sit on this couch, what happens is my brain starts saying, you need one more thing for this to be perfect. What is it? Yeah, for me, it's this, or this, right? Or maybe this. I'll settle for this, and if I really have to, the Tostitos, right? Something about that couch is telling me, just do one more thing and you'll feel really good, right? Just get the chips. What is it about the couch that's making me feel like that, right? The couch has become a cue for me, and you're going to hear that word a lot tonight. All the speakers are going to use the word cue. Just when we say that, just think of it, it's a sign or a signal that if you do something, something good can happen, right? So somehow, inadvertently, truly, I did not do this on purpose, I have programmed myself to sit on the couch and want something salty. So what is going on in my brain that's doing this? I'm not the healthiest guy in the world, and I'm trying to be better. So I don't do this every night. Some nights I'm able to say to myself, I don't need the chips, I'm fine. And I can use strategies to help me say that as well. So I can tell my wife, hey, I don't want to eat chips, don't let me eat chips. So when I get up and I start walking to the cabinet, she gives the look, right? Helps me stop the behavior that I don't want. It's a lot easier for me to indulge in this if the chips are in the cabinet. So unfortunately for my family, All the stuff on the left, not allowed in the house, right? And then I go and eat my kids' veggie chips or whatever that they have in the house for them. So I've set up this pattern, and I found it really doesn't matter. I could have not really eaten that much that day, or I could have just had Thanksgiving dinner. If I'm on the couch, I want the chips. If it's a stressful day sometimes, I might want the chips a little bit more. What is going on in my brain? So this is actually a question that we focused on a lot in behavioral neuroscience. What makes you feel good? How do you develop habits? And how do you change those habits when they don't work for you anymore? And we have a group that we study because this group is really, really excellent at finding the easiest way to make themselves feel good. So who's in that group? These guys, right? Our little furry friends, rats and mice. Mice are excellent at finding things that make them feel good. So we can use them to study what makes us feel good. How do we develop habits? How do we change habits? And some real fundamental studies in neuroscience that occurred in the last 10 or 20 years have shown us this. And it's very basic how this works. So a classic study that occurs in lots of different labs is you take one of these guys and you put them in a little box. We call that the start box. And there's nothing interesting in there. They sniff around and see what's going on in here. Not much. They get bored and fall asleep. But at some point, you open a door. And that door gives them access to a long hallway. So they'll go out, they're very curious, they want to explore, and they'll start sniffing down the hallway and saying, oh, can I find another mouse? Has anybody been in here? No, I didn't really find anything interesting. And then they get to the end of this hallway, and there's a goal box. And what do you think might be in the goal box? Something they like, right? Like Cheetos. We don't use Cheetos in the mice. We do use something else that might get you going if you see it. Oop. M&Ms, right? M&Ms are some sort of sweetened something that they really like. And so the mice said, okay, this is great. I'm glad I went down this hallway. And they eat the M&Ms. And what we know happens is that in a particular part of their brain, when they eat these M&Ms, we see the increase, and I'm sorry that I gave you the spoiler already, in this brain chemical that you might have heard about called dopamine. And so dopamine increases as the mice eat something that they find pleasurable. Okay, well that makes sense. That I understand now why I want the Cheetos, but what's going on with the couch? So if we put the mouse back in the start box again and make them wait for a little while, and then we open the door, what do you think might happen? Yeah, they're not going to sort of saunter down the runway. They're going to tear down the runway as fast as they can to get the M&Ms. And if you do this over and over and again, you find that this really interesting thing happens. That dopamine increase that comes when they get the M&Ms, it starts happening as soon as a door opens, right? Because that door opening is the cue for the mouse. If you just run down this hallway, you can get something great. So where is this occurring? Well, it's occurring in a part of the brain that's not out here on the cortex that you might be used to seeing, but down deep in the brain. In this area called the nucleus accumbens, it's highlighted for you now. And increases in dopamine in the nucleus accumbens are responsible for all of the pleasurable experiences you get from food, right? Even social interaction, even exercise. People don't usually believe that, but it can be rewarding, right? And so that cue taking over from the reward is how the mouse develops a habit. The door opens, they run. This is actually so strong that if you make the mouse not want the reward anymore, how are we going to do that? How are we going to make a mouse not like M&Ms? Well, what you can do is actually just dump a whole bag of M&Ms in their house before they run, and they just eat and eat and eat. And they get to that point where I have to admit I've been sometimes where I just don't want to see another M&M again, right? I'm never buying that brand of chips again because I ate the whole bag. So then you put them in the start box, and you open the door. What do you think happens? They tear down the runway, right? Because they've developed a pattern of behavior that when that door opens, dopamine goes up and tells them, just follow through on this and you get something you like. Even if you don't at the end, right? The development pattern of behavior or habit. And sometimes you'll hear this nucleus accumbens referred to as the reward center, because it doesn't matter what the reward with is, the mouse will run down just to interact with another mouse. Now, I said I don't have to have the chips every night. And eventually, if we make them not like the M&Ms or take the M&Ms away, the mouse will stop running. So there has to be an area of your brain that helps you control this. And I'm excited to tell you that there is. It's this area up here called the prefrontal cortex. What the prefrontal cortex does is it monitors what you're doing. What the mouse does, it says, okay, the mouse just started to run, and then it monitors what happens at the end of that. Oh, I got something good. That matched. I worked. I got something I liked. Keep going. That's fine. But what happens when there's a mismatch? Well, the prefrontal cortex will signal that as well. The door opened, dopamine told the mouse, run down this runway if you get something you like, and nothing's there. And over time, the prefrontal cortex will exert what we sometimes call executive control, or top-down control, and say, hey, deep brain systems like the nucleus accumbens and other areas, you need to stop this habit. It's not leading you to what you need. So now, just based on the circuitry that we know in the mouse, you can start to see why that couch that I have in my house cues the chips, and why I'm able to sometimes control it, not all the time. Because I think the important thing to remember is that even if they run down and they get something they don't like or they don't really want, that habit is not broken. The mouse has simply learned a new behavior. It's not worth it to run down there for that. And what mice usually do if there's nothing else interesting to do is just sit and make sure they look really good. They're really vain and they groom themselves just in case another mouse comes along. They want to look good. And that's sort of their default, what they do otherwise. But the habit or the pattern of behavior is not gone. How do we know that? Well, if we give them a little spring break and we don't put them in a hallway for a while, a week or two, give them off. After they've stopped running and you put them back in and you open the door, what do you guess happens? They run down again. So sometimes we'll refer to this as spontaneous recovery. This is that original pattern re-exerting itself. And if you think about it, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. They used to get something that they really like down there. Why not just go see if it's there? And if it's not, the pattern will drop off again. If it is there, then that's something completely different that we'll talk about in a little bit. So I could talk about this all day and about what mice do and what mice love, right? And it's interesting, I hope, to most of you, but it's really important to you if this has something to do with your life or the life of people in your family, right? Otherwise, we're just studying mice, and what's the point? What I'm here to tell you is that these brain areas that I'm talking about, the nucleus accumbens and dopamine, and the prefrontal cortex are right here as well. You see these areas in the human brain, roughly in the same area that you see it in the mouse and in all mammals. My nucleus accumbens and dopamine increases is responsible for my pleasure, just like it is in the mouse. And my prefrontal cortex lets me hopefully control some of those behaviors. So the really important thing to remember is I'm not just a body sitting on the couch, right? My brain is on the couch too. And my brain has been on the couch multiple times before when it's gotten something that makes it feel good, those chips. And when I put my brain back on the couch, it's going to say, hey, go get the chips again and we'll feel good, right? So now we have a brain on a couch. I can't resist. This is a perfect opportunity to turn it over to our next speaker, who's a psychiatrist, who will talk to you about what this circuitry means for you in your own life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Bravo, bravo. Thank you, Jonathan. So, brains on couches, yes, it's true. I am a psychiatrist with a brain, and I'm an addiction psychiatrist. But what's more is I'm an addiction psychiatrist with a strong habit for video games. I love video games. I play video games all the time. I dedicate time to video games. I prioritize them. It's important to me. They're positive. They help my brain. It turns out the research supports. It does. They're good for your brain. And I get good quality family time while I'm doing it. Now, I've recently been playing a game called Horizon Zero Dawn, just came out. This is the game with the image here. And what's amazing is that this process that Jonathan just described occurred with me and with this game, as it does with all games. From the moment I started playing the game, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I leave my house and I'm thinking about it. I get up in the morning and I'm thinking about it. In this game, I run around and scavenge these large machines that look like dinosaurs. And when I'm driving around and I see cars, I think of them. I'm cued. I look at the Sandia Mountains and I think of running around in these hills doing this, right? This is an important habit. And for me, it's an okay habit. It doesn't cause any problems. I consider it to be a family value, right? And it turns out that when we've done these pretty fancy brain imaging studies where we put somebody in a brain imager and have them play a game, we see activity in this nucleus accumbens and in the prefrontal cortex. We see these areas light up, which is why it facilitates a habit for me. And it's okay, it doesn't cause problems. But imagine if it did. Imagine if I didn't respond to my daughter while she was crying because I was so invested in the game, right? Or imagine I missed work because I just had to complete another level. That doesn't happen. But imagine if that happened. That would be different. It would be causing a dysfunction in my life. And that is really highlighting the difference between a habit and this other thing called an addiction, which we see. And my kind of burning question for so long has been, so what in the brain causes an addiction to occur? We know it's in the brain. What is it? And it turns out that it's the same circuitry that Jonathan just told us about. And this circuitry is fundamental to all mammals. All mammals have it. Turns out that we would not have evolved had we not had this circuitry. For evolution to happen, a species needs to find food, be interested in food, and eat enough food to mature and reach sexual maturity. And then enough members of that species need to reproduce to create another generation. And then that generation looks for food, and then enough of them reproduce to get another generation, and on down the line. It turns out that food or sexually pleasing images, for example, light up this area. They increase the amount of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens by about 45%. Now, this is a normal amount of dopamine increase. If we see food, if we see something that is sexually tantalizing, we need to get somewhat interested, but we should not lose control, right? After all, I should be interested in food, but I should be able to resist some food because some food is poisonous, right? And I might be interested in mating with somebody, but it's important to be able to resist that. I have other things to do, right? I have a job. So we need to be able to restrain ourselves. We need just enough dopamine increase in the nucleus accumbens to interest us. Now, this is normal. This is the normal process. Unfortunately, this is the same circuit that is involved with the development of addictions. So as an example, cocaine or methamphetamine increases dopamine in the nucleus accumbens by 500%. Alcohol increases this, opiates increase this. Cocaine and meth do it the most. 500%. This is way too much. Right? It's too much pleasure. It's too much reward. And by understanding the circuit, this helped me to understand that somebody can literally come to feel that a drug is required for survival. Because that's what this circuitry is for, survival of our species. And this same circuitry gets hijacked by a substance. I feel like I can't be without it. I feel like I have to have it. People tell me this. Patients tell me this. And it's not that the brain is malfunctioning. This is the normal process. It's just being taken advantage of by substances. It's essentially too good at its job. Because, of course, habits are important for life. But when they cause a problem, that's when we start to think about treatment. And should something different be done? But it's even more complicated. There's more to this hijacking process than just dopamine responding to a substance. Just like Jonathan explained with the mice. I mean, we're like mice, more or less. And understanding this other complexity, this other layer, helps us to understand how to approach addictions when we do treatment. So here's what happened. Jonathan explained to us that the mouse becomes cued by the door opening to run down the hall and get that chocolate, right? Now, chocolate reinforces human behavior too. We get excited and it's pleasurable. I don't know how many families are torn apart by chocolate. And as we saw, drugs and substances of abuse do this too much. They're way too powerful. So let's, instead of chocolate, take an example of alcohol. So alcohol in this case is a cue, becomes a cue. Somebody sees alcohol, it's offered to them. And then this prefrontal cortex that chooses behaviors, chooses to engage in this behavior that we call drinking, let's say. And it turns out that when we drink, we get an increase in dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, and it feels good, right? And that feeling good, it's rewarding. If you like the experience, you might repeat it. And then you might repeat it. You're like this mouse that they keep going down the hallway. You repeat it. And at first, the reward is really based on the behavior. You have to have the behavior to get the reward. But what happens is we start to build this association, just like the mouse does. This is something that this prefrontal cortex does. And after a while, there's a shift where we start to get the reward just from the cue. I see a drink and I already feel good. We can do these fancy brain imaging studies where we put people in who have an addiction and show them pictures of cocaine. And this area of the brain is already lighting up as if they're already used it. We can do it with alcohol. We can read them a script about cocaine and a script about going for a walk in the park. It does not happen when you're talking about going for a walk in the park. With the script, they hear the words, these cues about cocaine, and they start getting reinforcement. They're having activity in this area. So again, this clues us in to how we should approach this. So the cue can become the substance itself, but it can also be other things, right? It can be the substance. Whenever I see a bottle, I start thinking about it. If I maybe have a heroin use disorder and I see a picture of a syringe, I start really wanting to use heroin, right? It can be places. Yeah, that's the bar I always drink at, and it turns out that when I go to that bar, I want to have a drink. It can be people I always use with. I see them, I hear about them, I have a memory about them, and it makes me start to crave. It can also be other things, feelings and emotions, right? So if somebody develops a habit of self-medicating or self-treating anger or depression, then when they feel that emotion again, they will start to automatically think about using. They start to crave. And this is why people with addictions, if they want to change them, really need to learn how to change their behavior. Because they need to create new habits. Just like creating that new habit with the mouse. Create a new habit where there's no reward. You can do that here. But it's tricky. Right? It's really easy to say, just learn new behaviors. Part of the reason why I got into the field I'm in is because I was really curious about this question. Why can't people just stop? There's all this trail of destruction behind you. You've gotten infectious diseases from injecting drugs. Your family's torn apart. Why don't you just stop? And the truth is, what we have to remember is that the brain has been hijacked. And that's the answer. The answer to this. So even if the substance isn't creating a good time anymore, a couple things are happening. One is that the prefrontal cortex is remembering the good time. It sure wants that again. The other difference here, the other issue that's going on, is that when the substance is taken again, even if it doesn't result in a good time, it is still chemically reinforcing the circuit. It is activating the nucleus accumbens. So my nucleus accumbens reads pleasure, 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 even if I've gotten in a car accident, my significant other has left me, I'm horribly depressed afterwards. The moment that drug hit my brain through my bloodstream, the nucleus accumbens was reinforced. And it learned, hey, good. Because it lives in the moment, if you will, and it doesn't care about the long-term devastation. The other problem with the idea of, well, just stop, is that this prefrontal cortex, where we decide what behaviors to do, it's impaired by intoxicants. And this we can reliably reproduce when we study it, and my patients demonstrate this all the time. The more we use intoxicants, the less well we are able to decide what behaviors are in our favor and what behaviors are harming us. It's actually hard to put one and one together. Because this other part of our brain is telling the prefrontal cortex, this was great, chemically. And if we're intoxicated, it's hard to really find kind of the difference between this great feeling and all the destruction that's going on in life around us. And this makes change hard. What it makes is a difficulty of recognizing the link between drug use and the harms that it's causing. And this is why what many people who are in recovery, what they need most are other people's brains, other people's prefrontal cortexes or cortices, to help them make the decision and figure out what decisions are actually helping me and which are hurting me, because my computer processor is not working. It's impaired. So we need to engage the help of others and learn how to experience pleasure without intoxication. Learn how to appreciate that normal dopamine response of 45%. So it's interesting, Jonathan mentioned this idea of just break the habit. And when we think of that, I think it's hard for us to help people because breaking habits doesn't work neurologically. What we need to do is not break a habit, but build a new one. And this is something that Anne is going to help us figure out how to do.
So this is pretty fascinating, isn't it? I have to tell you, I am a self-avowed neuro nerd, and I just get all excited when I talk about this stuff. Now I'm going to point out to you something, and that is that the presenters who came before me, they're younger than me, right? So they have all the new knowledge that 30 years ago, when I was a graduate student, we didn't have, right? I learned you get to be about 19 or 20, your brain is done. It is done. There is no rewiring, there is no growth. You're just, it's not happening. So, besides the fact that I now have a graduate degree that is obsolete, I fortunately have colleagues that keep me up to date with this. But what is not new, and that is what I get to talk about tonight, is the fact that as long as humankind has thought about itself, it has known, even though we didn't understand it from a brain standpoint, that if you change the way you think and you change the way you behave, you can change your existence. At the end of the 19th century, William James was one of the sort of founding fathers of modern psychology, said this: if you can change your mind, you can change your life. And now what we know is actually what you're doing is you're changing your brain, which changes your behavior, which changes your brain, which changes your behavior, which changes your brain, right? And now it's not, I don't want to give mice a bad name, but they actually are not quite as self-reflective as humans, right? At least none of the mice I know, right? So what I'm going to talk about is what does it take for us to change our brains? What we know, maybe, here we go, there we go. Oh no, spoiler alert. We need a couple things. We need motivation. Well, what does that mean, right? People say, well, you have to absolutely want to stop drinking or stop smoking or start exercising. And what we know now is that's not really true, right? A little ambivalence will go a long way, right? I don't have to want to quit smoking, but what I can want is not to be a parent who smokes around my children, right? I actually want to be a non-smoking mother more than I want to be a smoking professor, right? So a little motivation, and sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to be motivated intrinsically. We need extrinsic motivation, and I spoiled mine. This is my motivator. His name is Mingus, right? I have the couch issue that Jonathan has, right? Now, I sort of blended you two, right? Because I like to go at the end of the long day and sit on the couch and actually play word games on my phone because I can't shoot metal dinosaurs. That makes me that is not relaxing for me. That may be an age thing as well, right? But I can play word games all night long. But you know what? I shouldn't be doing that, right? I'm maturing, and so I need to be exercising. Barry tells me I need to get my cholesterol down and my heart rate down and all that stuff. And exercise is good for that, right? So I need to develop a habit that supplants my habit of moving from dishwasher to couch to cell phone. So I'm not very motivated to do that. I'm not an inherently dedicated exerciser. But you know what? Mingus, he is a dedicated exerciser, right? So I sit at dinner, and this is the look I get. Right? And if that doesn't motivate you, I don't know what will. And then what happens is that if I don't go to the couch and go to my sneakers instead, then Mingus starts doing the happy dog dance, right? And what does that do? That makes me laugh. What does laughter do? Well, I'll be gosh darned if it doesn't give me a little dopamine spurt right there in my prefrontal cortex. And then I put his leash on, and we head out the door night after night after night. And now suddenly, I'm thinking this walking is kind of a fun thing to do, right? I've developed a habit, thanks to my friend Mingus, who does the happy dog dance, so I will laugh and get a dopamine surge and then head out the door, right? So it's important to recognize that if we want to make changes, we need a little tiny bit of motivation, and then we have to be really diligent about just doing it over and over and over again. We go forward about 100 years, and this is a quote by a man in the 1970s. Dr. Nathan Azrin was a behavioral change researcher in Illinois, and so he recognized this. He said, the truth is your brain can absolutely be reprogrammed, but you have to be deliberate about it. It takes deliberation. Well, what the heck does that mean, right? Well, what that means is that you have to bring some things to the table. What are they? Well, this is not your brain, okay? I just want you to know that I did not get this in the same way that these guys got their brain pictures, okay? But what I did recognize is that in order to be deliberate, look, I'm going to try to use a pointer too, I'm kind of jumping into the 21st century. You have to bring some things to the table. So what do? Well, the first thing you do is you have to figure out where you're going, right? You have to look toward where you want to be. Now, I practice a type of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, and for any of you who may be familiar with that, that sounds a lot like goal setting. Where do I want to go, right? And then I have to decide, okay, well, which path do I want to take? So my goal is to be an exerciser. Well, which path is that? Is that the walking around the neighborhood path? Is that the training for the half marathon doggy dash and dawdle race? It is not that one. I just want to, personal disclosure, I'm all about walking around the neighborhood, okay? Then I have to say to myself, wonder what the weather's like. What does that mean? That means I have to figure out what's going to get in my way of developing these habits. In cognitive behavioral therapy, that means planning for obstacles, right? If I have something more severe, if I'm trying to break a habit like drinking, guess what? I have to recognize that if I go by the bar that I always stop at to have a drink, that's an obstacle. I have to find a new way home, right? And then finally, I have to make sure I have the tools, right? I have to know that I have either within me or around me those things that will allow me to teach my brain that there are other things besides the couch and word games or the alcohol or the cocaine that will make my prefrontal cortex get all excited, all right? A couple other things I want you to be aware of. It is never too early to start this behavior, nor is it ever too late to start this behavior, right? So this is a talk that is applicable no matter who you are and how old you are. All right. So let's look at what are those things that you need to bring to the table as far as tools. And we get the information about that really from my area of interest, which is clinical practice research, right? What works? If we try A, does that work better than B? Why would that be? How do we make sure people do A the same way every time? And so what researchers have found is there are several things that consistently bring pleasure to the brain that are infinitely more healthy to you than chips or M&Ms or shooting metal dinosaurs, just saying, okay? Or for me, playing word games on the couch. It's just, oh, whoops. I am just gonna spoil everything tonight. There are several things up here that I want to point out because these are consistently found within therapeutic practice to benefit you in changing into healthier habits and building those circuitry. My personal favorite, maybe, right? Exercise. Now, Jonathan alluded to this earlier, and I am completely in line with this, but you see people who actually talk about runner's highs, right? You know what they're talking about? Dopamine, right? Big old dopamine spurt in their prefrontal cortex area and their nucleus accumbens, right? Now, I don't get that, all right? I understand that, but I don't get that. But a lot of my patients get that, right? If I can get patients to go out and do some exercise and remind themselves that there are other things that will give them pleasure, those habits that they have formed, not so much. We're building a new one. Another thing is journaling, right? Lots of cognitive behavioral therapies have you journal. It is very common if you go to a residential program for substance use treatment, you get a blank journal, right? And there's all sorts of things that you can write about that will be helpful. One of my personal favorites, and there is lots of research that's coming out about this now, is that something as simple as what's called a gratitude journal really helps you, right? So at the end of the day, you write 3 things down, or 5 things down, or 10 things down, you can pick the number, that reminds you of good things that have happened. And this is particularly important if you're trying to, say, get off drugs, because oftentimes those things for which you are grateful remind you not only the benefit of your treatment, but it reminds you why you started this in the first place. Because sometimes those old circuits fire up again, right? And so this helps you with that. You can't really see this. This says courage is contagious, right? One of the things we know now is that if you are fearful about something and you move toward that and experience yourself overcoming that, that too makes you feel good about yourself. Contentment, right? Same circuitry. Same circuitry. Another thing, I love this picture because it's like 3 things together, right? New research coming out, absolute importance of being out in nature. Right? Very, very important. We sort of forget that we're creatures, but we're creatures. Actually, this past weekend really helped with that. This reminds you of your creaturehood, right? How many had trouble getting up Sunday morning, right? Because we have animal brains. They like to sleep when it's dark and get up when it's light, right? The other thing about this particular picture is this man is also walking, and he's walking with a support and accountability buddy, right? And that leads me to this one right here, and that's social activation. Oftentimes when we have been hijacked and developed a habit that is not healthy, our whole social existence is centered on that. In my work at the university, I treat adolescents who have substance use disorders, right? So not only am I going to try to get them to stop using substances, but I'm also going to tell them they have to give up all their friends, right? That is so hard. So I don't say that. I say, let's look at some new friends, right? Who are some other people? Who are some people you haven't seen in a while that you really enjoyed before, but they've sort of dropped off now that you're smoking 5 bowls of marijuana a day, right? And that goes to Dan's point that sometimes it takes them a second to remember they had friends before that, right? That's where I come in. And that's where I actually have their parents come in too, right? I say to parents, look, we're trying to build new pathways. We have to build the new pathways. We have to reinforce those new pathways. Yes, it's so tempting to nag them about the old behavior, but that actually reinforces the behavior. It draws all that attention. Support them in the new behavior. So if I was going to work with Jonathan's wife to try to help him with his salty chip thing, I actually would encourage her not to give him the look, right? Because the look, then he's got to deal with the shame and, oh my God, she knew I was really thinking about those chips. But on the nights when he's sitting there not eating chips, I'd have her go, Jonathan, great job. Wow, it was a really tough day. I'll bet you wanted some chips, and you didn't do it. I'm so excited. All right? There's a Vietnamese poet named Thich Nhat Hanh. He says we're always practicing something, right? And we get better at what we practice. That's the deliberateness, that's the reinforcing, that's the patterns, that's the habituation, right? That's how our brain works. So be careful what you practice, and be careful what you reinforce in other people. There's one more area of research that I think is really, really exciting, and I want to share with you tonight because it too has had such a tremendous effect in helping people change their lives when their lives have been hijacked, right? So there's a whole literature on it in treating addictions, but also all sorts of other kinds of disorders. And that's actually the practice of meditation, right? Mindfulness. You'll hear them both called the same way, right? So this obviously is a monk. He's wearing a cap that has a bunch of electrodes that lets us find out all sorts of fascinating information that are going on in his brain. And here's what we know. Meditators actually have thicker brains in that part of their brain that brings on contentment. Now, you may say to me, Anne, I'm not a monk. I don't even have quiet in my household, right? But what we know from the research is that you don't have to be a monk. You can be this guy, right? You'll be glad to know, do not have to be this guy, because if I sat like that, I actually would never get up again, right? You can sit in a chair, do the same thing. And that's what the research has shown us, that even what they called naive meditators, people who had never meditated before, you teach them how to meditate. You teach them to be present with whatever's coming. It goes back to Dan's comment that, you say, use the drug. Well, guess what? It can come up and you go, oh, that's interesting. There's that use the drug thought again. I don't have to do it, right? Because I'm centered and I'm right here. And I can be present in this moment and get pleasure from knowing I'm making healthier choices. So what's the take home, right? What's the message I want you to walk out of here? Well, I want you to remember that this is just brain circuits that we share with all of our mammalian brothers and sisters, if you will, right? That it's actually a very effective way to manage information and develop habits that are positive and keep us healthy and reproduce and all those sorts of things. But they can get hijacked. That's what Dan was talking about. But all you have to do is say, okay, wait, little motivation, right? Find your own mingus. That's the take home, find your own mingus. And build a different circuit. So even if that old one fires, you go, I actually don't have to respond to you because I have a new one now. And it's so much more important to me. And it's taking me where I want to go. What I want you to remember is it's really all about doing it over and over again. That helps your brain, helps you, help your brain, help you. There's an old adage that says, practice makes perfect. But I think what you need to remember is here, practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. And the more you practice, the better that circuitry is going to be, and the healthier you're going to be. Thank you. Now, please go ahead. We're going to go ahead and take questions now. There are going to be people coming through the audience to pick up the questions that you have written down. We have a couple questions that already came, and we're going to start with those.
Down,
Okay.
and then, so I think as these questions are coming up, let's sort of think about where we are with this science. Because as I listen to this, I think about my training and where we were when we had the patient with heart failure, and the only thing we could do was to tell them to not eat so much salt. And as you listen to this, you say to yourself, And John, you might comment on some of the experimental data which looks at interventions that may have an effect. Because what we're saying right now, if I'm not mistaken, is that there aren't drugs to do this for the most part. There really are people. It takes the people with skills that Dan and Ann have to do this. And we don't have those kind of resources right now. So I'm just curious, you might just mention that.
Right, so that's a really interesting point, and I think I want to say something real quick and then pass it over to Dan and Ann. What Dan talked about and what you saw in his graph showing those dopamine levels is that long-term abuse of a substance or development of a really, we say maladaptive, but something that's not working for you, actually changes the level in your brain. So what you really need to do, again, is build these new circuits or patterns of behavior that will get you dopamine and other positive ways that don't interfere with your life. But again, your dopamine levels and your brain's response to it have changed after you've been doing this. And I think that's where some of the therapeutics can actually help. And I'm not the person to speak about that, but to get you back to a level where you can start implementing all of these wonderful strategies that Ann talked about.
Well, I guess I was thinking more about the idea of ablating portions of the brain that had to do with some of these responses. Where are we with that? And perhaps you could look at it from a clinical standpoint as some type of, again, I go back to the heart where there are abnormal rhythm disturbances. We put a burn in the right place in the heart and it gets rid of them. Is this so simplistic that it comes from a cardiologist?
I can speak about it. So it's very tempting, this idea of, hey, if this is the addiction center in the brain, let's just remove it. Right? It sounds tempting. And it has been tried in humans. This was actually first done by some neuroscientists in China. And they started experimenting with this and finding, well, which part of the nucleus accumbens, because it turns out that it's a complex structure. And sure enough, they found that there was a reduction in substance use disorders in some of the people that they did this to. But at a cost. This is important circuitry. This makes us want to have a delicious meal. It makes us seek novelty, enjoy new experiences, enjoy interacting with people. And not all of the subjects in these studies, but some of them lost that. And that really is at odds with what Ann was talking about and with what we do when we work with people who are trying to overcome an addiction, which is that we encourage them to find activities that are pleasurable and don't involve being intoxicated. We want to compete with the memory of that great high and find quality of life again, normally, naturally. And it works. It turns out it works if you do that. But if we don't have a nucleus accumbens, we lose that ability.
Wouldn't be playing video games.
And that would be a tragedy.
No, I have to tell you, I am grateful. I've been wanting to buy an Xbox for years.
Do it. I will be your sponsor. Yeah.
Ann, you have a question there.
So the question I received was, what is different in the brains of people who become addicted compared to those who don't become addicted? All right. And I'm going to give my answer, and then I'll let the neuroscientists talk as well. At this point, we are not able to see anything that is clearly different, okay? That the circuitry, and I think that's what we're talking about tonight, that the circuitry that is involved is consistent across people. Now, we continue to look for that, right? There's some interesting research on frontal lobe activation, and do these people take more of something to get excited? But I will tell you right now, there is not any difference. And that is actually a really good thing, because that means that the same circuitry that maybe got hijacked can be used to help them. When Dan talked about the brain being hijacked, what I really wanted to say was, you know, if your brain gets hijacked, you don't need a new brain. You just need to get rid of the hijackers, right? And the way you get rid of the hijackers is you bring more people into your brain or on the plane, depending on what you're doing, who are supporting you in doing something healthy, right? So I think what's important to remember is that in the right place, at the right time, with the right stressors and the right condition, addiction could impact any of us, right? And that's why, for me, who you surround yourself with and support your healthier behaviors is so important. And that's not easily done sometimes. Certainly some of the patients that I have worked with, you know, I started seeing substance abusing patients in 1990 who were homeless, right? So it's hard to build a community to support you, but we actually had some really good data to show we could help them do that. Am I lying?
Well, no, I don't think that you are. I think that's accurate. So in the more basic side, we've really been interested in this question. Is there something about the receptors that respond to dopamine that's more active in people who are more apt to become habitual for good or ill? Or is there changes in how quickly dopamine is cleared before it has a chance to act on these receptors? And in the preclinical studies used in rodents, we can do that, and we can see that we can make animals develop habits faster, or we can make them not develop habits as fast. But as to my understanding, at this point, we haven't been able to find anything that determines that in human beings, how responsive you are to dopamine, for instance.
A question from the audience that may absolutely resonate among some of the people in the room is that how do you deal with a family member who continuously nags you about a certain bad habit? That may not apply to very many people, but...
Well, so, I mean, I think what you said was perfect, and I hate to use, throw my wife under the bus in this example, because she's really not that bad about doing it. But, I always come back to something that our just absolutely fantastic pediatrician at UNMH told us, and she's just the most mellow person in the world, and she says, when your kid is having that fight and that breakdown at Toys R Us and screaming, don't give him attention. Avert your eyes. Say, you know what? I don't want to spend time with somebody who's going to act like that, and walk away. Not too far, Toys R Us. Right? I think that is the absolute hardest thing to do in the world as a parent or as somebody who cares about somebody in their family who's doing something self-destructive. And then I'll be teaching in the School of Medicine, talking about learning theory, and there it is. Any attention is reinforcing, right? So I think that as the person, on the other end of it, who's constantly being nagged, hypothetically, it's important to realize that, most of this comes from a good place, a place of love. They want you to do something better. And if you can acknowledge that and say, listen, I know you're saying this to me because you want me to be better and you want me to be happier, and I will be happier if I stop doing this. But I promise you can call Dr. Bergman, he'll show you the research. This is not going to work. You need to reinforce the positive behaviors.
So what do the two addiction specialists tell us? That that's almost an addiction, nagging.
You can't expect them to break that habit either, right? You have to just help them develop a different habit, right? That's true. So just like I said, if you have a loved one who has a habit that is not so healthy, don't pay a lot of attention to that. But when they're doing the thing you want them to do, reinforce that. Yeah. So the day that I don't go exercise, right, Mingus doesn't get it when I go, I really appreciate your enthusiasm about me walking, but my family members do, right? I can say, you know what, I really value how much you love and care about me. It actually doesn't help me. And so maybe the next time I do walk, and I do the thing that helps you feel better about my longevity prospect, why don't you reinforce me for that? Tell me how proud you are of that, right? But they're battling a circuit they've been doing for a while too, right? So you're both changing circuitry.
Right. Yeah, I invite parents and family members of all my patients. I invite the patient to bring them into the session because they need the brains, the prefrontal cortices of their community to help. But my main goal in that is specifically to teach those family members and loved ones to stop nagging. And everybody, all the family members who come and see me, walk away with a flyer for a book written, it turns out, by two people from a place called Albuquerque, New Mexico, but which is a worldwide standard. And an amazing book titled, Get Your Loved One Sober, Alternatives to Pleading, Nagging, and Threatening. Because those don't work. Those don't work. If they were going to work, they would have worked the first time.
1,500 years ago.
Right. Right.
So another question about hypnosis. Is there a role for hypnosis in these addiction problems?
Interesting question. So some...
Answered like a psychiatrist.
Yeah. Tell me what you really mean by that question. There have been hypnosis services certainly for tobacco use disorder, tobacco use, smoking cessation, and some reasonable outcomes. I'm not familiar with good outcomes for other substances of abuse, but I also haven't seen it fail. There's not a lot of money dedicated to hypnosis research. And so it might just be, that might be the problem, is that it's not being done.
Just a practical question that many of you know, I run a cardiac rehabilitation program called New Heart. If you don't know where it is, if you know where the taqueria is, it's right up the block from the taqueria, which is the gourmet restaurant in Mexico. In it, I have about 100 patients, all of whom have either had a heart attack, a heart transplant, heart failure, or heart surgery. And probably 90% of them have never exercised in their life. And most of them are over 50. And so I'm sitting down with them and talking to them about the fact that they should be exercising. So I could use some help. How would you recommend the addiction to the couch? Which basically that's what it is.
I think everybody needs a Mingus. That's my favorite. No, I'm just kidding. You know, I think it's interesting, though, because you have patients who have had all those things, and they don't come back for their follow-up. So the fact that they're coming back to you, even if they don't quite get into the exercise groove, that tells me they have that little tiny bit of motivation, right?
No, they come, and they hate it.
Well, of course they hate it. But the bottom line is there's a lot of them who never come back, right?
That's true.
Right?
That is true.
So part of the thing is you have to find out what will motivate them to exercise. And they may be like me. They may not be an intrinsically motivated exerciser. But if let's say their spouse says, okay, you remember that that new video game you wanted, right? If we do 30 days at the gym together, side by side, all right, I'll give in, you can have the new metal dinosaur blowing up game, right? So you have to find out what motivates them. And I think what happens in a lot of instances, and in addition to treating addictions, I have worked in medical settings, is we assume that something as scary as a heart attack, scary as a heart attack, right? That's going to motivate you. It didn't do that. It may motivate you for a little bit, but then guess what? Those darn cardiovascular surgeon makes me feel a lot better, and I don't have to worry about my heart anymore, right? So you have to bring it back to them and remind them why they're here, remind them what motivates them, right? You work with their spouses, right? And so They may never want to quit smoking, but if their wife says, you know, it really shows me how much you love me, that you're struggling against this tobacco addiction. Thanks for doing that. That's how I'd go about it.
So you pair it with a reward.
Indeed.
Yeah, if it's not intrinsically rewarding itself.
Not lunch at the taqueria, though, right after they've exercised.
There's a question here. Are there medicines that help reduce dopamine to treat habits or addictions? And it's a super interesting question. And I think that there are two parts to it. So there are medicines that can help with 3 addictions. We can only help with 3 of them at this point. We've tried lots of things. Nothing else works. None of them work directly by reducing dopamine, though. So we have a medicine to help reduce cravings to drink alcohol. We have medicines that can help reduce cravings for opiates, heroin or opiate pills. We have also a medicine that will block opiates. So somebody who uses them takes them and it has no effect. And then we have medicines that can help reduce cravings for tobacco or nicotine, really. We don't have medicines that help meth, none that consistently help cocaine, etc. But again, they don't work through dopamine. But what's interesting about this question about dopamine is we have other medicines, for example, that help to treat this disorder called Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease is where your dopamine neurons poop out, and you're not creating dopamine. So we will give dopamine so that you can move, because dopamine is very complex. It's all over the brain, and it's also involved with movement and coordination of things. But what's really interesting is that in some people, if you give them these dopamine-increasing medicines, even without a prior history of an addiction, they'll develop one. And where we really see this is with gambling. You've seen this. It's a fascinating thing. Some people will take this medicine, never gambled, but there is a gambling addiction. It uses that circuit because it's so reinforcing. I win. And even when you don't win, there's a promise of, I will win. And so people will become compulsive gamblers. And then you stop the medicine and it stops. It's incredible. So the comment was people with Parkinson's, when they see the candy, they light up because it's at least getting some sort of a response.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point. We talked about dopamine primarily tonight about reward, but as Dan mentioned, it's involved in a lot of processes, initiating movement sequences and then automating those movement sequences. So everybody here has probably had the experience of pulling into their parking spot or their garage at home, and you don't remember the last 10 minutes of your drive because you were thinking about something else, right? You developed this motion sequence habit, something that was really, really hard for you to do the first time you did it, backing out of the driveway, first driving lesson, is now second nature. It's automated, and dopamine is involved in that. So learning these processes, initiating them, and that's one of the reasons why targeting the system directly may not be the best avenue, because it's so fundamental to our survival as human beings. So what we do is sort of work around the edges of its effects.
So let me ask a final question. Another 10 years when you're 20 years old, what?
50.
I'd like the 3 of you to say, let's say we come back here for a discussion in 10 years. What do you think we'll be talking about?
So if I can go first, I don't know if anybody had the opportunity to attend the Dazzling Brain Talk last year, but something that they talked about was not specific to targeting the nucleus accumbens and dopamine specifically, but they talked about treatments that can affect other areas of the brain. And I think rather than decrease the good feeling you're getting, what we're probably going to be seeing more and more as new therapeutics that allow you to increase your PFC. And get that executive function boosted up.
The prefrontal cortex.
That prefrontal cortex. So things like transcranial direct current stimulation, which you might have heard of or heard about in the last talk, and other therapies that sort of help the monitoring system and let you realize, oh, what I've been doing is having really bad effect. on me and on other people. Personally, I think that's probably what we'll be talking about in 10 years.
So I'm not sure what we'll be talking about, but here's what I hope we'll be talking about. In the treatment of all sorts of disorders, and I know that Barry will attest to this in cardiology too, we go constantly back and forth over, well, are psychosocial, cognitive behavioral therapies better, or is there just the magic drug, right? So we're sort of in a drug phase now, right? We're putting a lot of money and time and energy into big pharma, right, is what it's called. And what I hope we're talking about in 10 years is that we have gotten away from that dichotomy in its entirety, and we're working constantly in a team-based approach that if there is a drug that can be helpful, let's use that drug, but know that that drug has consequences, and how do you live your life with that drug on board? And so we sort of stop moving into this either-or mindset, and we really say, let's treat this whole person with whatever tools are available and value the contributions from all the different disciplines. That's what I hope we're talking about in 10 years.
My prediction, which I hope, and it's funny because it might sound like science fiction, but this research is already being done. In 10 years, it will still be somewhat nascent, but I hope that what we'll be talking about is not just programming people's brains through behavior, but literally programming people's brains. This is being done and looked at already through a variety of different methods. One is by putting little electrodes actually in the brain so that we can deliver signals there. This is actually something that has already worked beautifully in Parkinson's disease, for example. We call it deep brain stimulation. But there's also this other kind of area called optogenetics, where we can literally learn how to program neurons and program neuron growth. And literally, now being done in like zebrafish, but eventually be done in others, program behavior. Now, I don't ever want a like mind-controlling, machine out there. But if we can rebuild damaged circuits, right? Something we haven't talked about tonight is that unfortunately, while we can regrow a lot of cells in our body, for the most part we don't regrow brain cells. And while not all drugs of abuse kill brain cells, plenty of them do. And so if we can regrow some of those, or put in new circuits, even if it's not neurons, it's something else, that's getting us closer to kind of Star Trek medicine, but really kind of helping, because this is the problem now, which is that we are getting better and better at understanding how somebody's brain might be damaged or broken, and are not able to do much about that physically. We can help people learn how to cope and adapt, but if we could rebuild that, that would be awesome. So I hope.
Well, those are good predictions. I am very excited about this. I think it just, what I think that, particularly for a lot of people who've been tormented by the news lately, worried about healthcare, worried about all these things, it's good to step back and see what we have at the Health Science Center at the university, and see these three extraordinary people and what they bring to our community and our state and to the science, and feel really good about it. We have great things at our university, and we have particularly, my experience now with the neuroscience area, I'm just tremendously excited about it, and it's something that all of you should be excited about. Lori Peterkin, thank you very much for your help, and thank you to the Academy, and thank everybody for coming.
Great.